Hello and welcome to the Career Success Podcast. I'm Jason Connolly. If you're a regular listener, it's great to have you back, but if you're new, welcome to the show. In this insightful and thought-provoking series, we speak to business leaders and people who've had high levels of career success. But we also talk to up-and-coming and emerging business talent. We speak to such a variety of people all across the globe. We talk about success habits and what they do in order to ensure they stay at the top of their game. Listen and find out hints and tips to help you in the world of business and your career. How do you set up your own business and make sure it's a success? But we also talk about business growth and how to get your company noticed. Practical advice to help you in your career from those who have made it. In this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr Steve Yacovelli from Orlando, Florida. Dr Steve, a.k.a. the Gay Leadership Dude, is an expert in diversity and inclusion, change management and leadership. His consulting firm, TopDog Learning Group, works with both Fortune 500s and non-for-profit organisations to bring about a more inclusive and effective workplace. An award-winning author, speaker and catalyst, Steve's latest book, Pride Leadership, is helping both LGBTQ plus and ally leaders be even more awesome. Steve and his pack of TopDoggers, not so hidden agenda is to make the world a bit more inclusive for us all. Steve, thanks for joining me on this episode.
Thank you so much, Jason. Pleasure to be here.
So before we go into the book, Pride Leadership, let's talk about your career and how it all kind of got started for you.
Yeah, so I've been doing this kind of leadership, diversity, change management stuff pretty much my whole career. So it's been 3 years. No, I'm
Mm.
just kidding. It's been 25 years or so. And it's I've worked in various organizations. I worked internal with some large Fortune 500s like the Walt Disney Company with IBM, and then I was a college professor for a hot minute right after I got my doctorate. And then I really started Top Dog in 2008 as a way to just kind of take the show on the road and kind of be the captain of my own ship, whether that be a nice big yacht or a little tiny dinghy, just to kind of see where it went. And that's really what I've been doing ever since. I have an army of awesomeness, I like to say, my top doggers, folks who actually do a lot of the consulting with me. And as you said, we work primarily with larger organizations, Fortune 500s, global entities, and larger not-for-profit organizations doing the leadership, change management, and diversity and inclusion consulting as best as we can.
How did you first get into kind of change management and consultancy? Was it something that you'd done a previous job before, or did you just go straight from academia into that?
No, I'd been an IBMer, which of course, so
Right.
I was an external consultant, when I reflect on all the jobs I've done, it's actually been like internal consulting, usually like in the HR leadership space. And so when I went to IBM as my first, I'm going to a client kind of thing Monday through Thursday, and I was like, wow, I've kind of been doing this kind of work already, and so I kind of
Right.
took that and got that great experience, and just love IBM. I had such a wonderful time with them, and then realized that I can start my own little boutique firm, and that's kind of how I launched Top Dog.
Right. Okay. Has your the work that you've done in consultancy, has it kind of changed and evolved as you've kind of progressed and got more, become more experienced in your career, or has the kind of work remained quite similar throughout?
No, it's a great question. What I've realized is, people always say, "Oh, what industry do you work with? Are you in retail or entertainment or what?" And it's like, leadership is leadership is leadership. But what I have seen change is how I look at coaching leaders on being more effective. And a lot of that comes down to things like, how do you be more consciously inclusive as a leader, regardless of where you sit within a business or a workplace? How are you managing the change within the workplace? And so, when I say we do leadership, change management, and diversity and inclusion, if you think of the Venn diagram, if you will, a lot of times everything we do is all three. And I like that because
Right.
it really, when you think about like, oh, I want to create a more inclusive workplace, well, you're actually using fundamentals of change management to do that. You're using your leadership awesomeness to help facilitate that change to be more inclusive. And so, yeah, I talk about them discreetly, but they absolutely are not. They're so gorgeously intertwined.
Well, and when you say kind of, you've mentioned the word inclusive already a number of times. What does inclusiveness mean within a company? What is it maybe that the company isn't doing that you're helping them introduce?
Yeah,
Because it's quite a broad term.
yeah, it is a broad term. So when I first started getting into kind of this topic in this space, it was actually when I was
Mm.
at Disney. and we were teaching people to be, go into being more inclusive, and people say diversity and inclusion. So, one of my mentors gorgeously said, diversity is the many similarities and differences amongst people, period. So, it's the differences that people have we'll say in the workplace, but of course it's beyond that as well. Now, inclusion, just because it's diversity and inclusion, is really trying to bring people to the proverbial table and listen to their perspectives, and kind of garner those different ideals in order to be bringing people having that space to the table. So, how she gorgeously said it was, diversity is being asked to the dance, and inclusion is being actually asked to dance. And I always thought that was a cool way to do it. What you actually do see, smarter organizations are taking it one step further and are saying it's not just diversity and inclusion, but it's belonging. And so what it's doing is turning the script versus the organization. Now it's about the employee, or the team member. And so belonging is where I feel as an individual that I'm respected, I'm valued, I can be my true authentic self within the workplace, and that's completely okay. And so in the dancing analogy, it's I can dance any hell way I want to, and that's totally okay as well.
I love that. A great antidote. How does a company get to the point where they're bringing you in? Then what is it that they've maybe identified, or what do they hit kind of a roadblock and think we need an inclusive and diversity expert in here now? How does it come about?
It's a couple different ways that we've been engaging with clients, and even during these weird and wonderful COVID times, we've actually seen a great spike in different
Mm,
ways that we can engage. My doctorate actually happens to be in instructional technology and distance education, so the world of Zoom is kind of my jam, and that's kind of been a good thing.
yeah.
But a lot of times it could be just one off where we're complementing an already existing focus on diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So it could be a virtual keynote that we do, or when we could go on site,
Mm,
we go on site and do those that sort of things. So it kind of be that low level that's kind of sharing the story that's already being sung within the business. Then it could be that what, we really don't have a really good inclusive strategy, and so we could go in and help people think of that. We could bring our off-the-shelf training or virtual training. It's a whole different ways that we can think about it as far as engaging with clients, but it usually starts with them saying, what, we could do better. Whether that be senior leadership realizes it, whether it could be outside events like the Black Lives Matter movement really make people rethink it, or it could be individuals within the business who say, what, we need to do better, and here's some of the ways that we can do that to be more consciously inclusive.
I think what you're saying about Zoom is exactly right. It's kind of that an everyday bit of technology for you in America because you're such a big country. For us, it's been something which we've really adapted to. I think that we're so used to having in-person meetings.
Yeah.
Where, is there kind of a common thing that you tend to find when going into big companies for the first time in leadership teams? Is there kind of a common problem or issue that you have to address when you go in? Something that you tend to see that happens quite a lot in companies.
I usually see that organizations are going down this process of being more consciously inclusive for one of three reasons, and I kind of think about it on a continuum. On
Mhm.
one side, it's like the punitive, where regardless of where you live, there's probably some sort of rules that say if you don't do this, and you're going to get penalized this way when it comes to inclusivity. So there's kind of that side of the world. And the complete opposite side of that spectrum is to make the world a better place. We can be a more inclusive workplace, which means it feels better for everybody, and that's kind of a good thing to do. So that more altruistic kind of approach. And then in the middle there somewhere is, it makes the right business sense. And there's, if you Google business case for diversity and inclusion, you will see all sorts of great studies that have been done over and over again about, the more diverse the workplace is, the more diverse the leadership team is, the more they do higher performance and better output, and better return on
Mm.
investments and all that good stuff. So I kind of approach it from three different ways. Of course, I want everybody to be like, well, this is the right thing to do. It makes the world better, sure. But I also know that within the workplace, some people are, I use the term voluntold to be in some of our workshops and our sessions. Someone said it's a good idea if, and that comes from the top down, like, okay, boss. And so when they walk in that way, that's okay. Hey, at least they're in the room, and then we have the opportunity to kind of share with them, yes, this is the right thing to do, but for you, wouldn't you agree that your business would be better served to be getting more market share and reaching more people, most folks are like, well, sure, that's job security. That's awesome. Great. Then let's start at
Mm.
that point. And some other folks, especially our lawyer or legal barrister friends might say, you know what, let's do the punitive approach and kind of work it from that way. Sure, that's fine too. Either way, I get them through the door, and then we can kind of start working and sharing and coaching on the benefits of being more inclusive.
Yeah, I think you make a very valid point there. I think the legal industry in the UK has come on a long way in the last decade. It was notoriously bad for having diversity, but it's really been something that's been in the media and the press a lot recently about the lack of kind of representation of different minorities at board level and director level and partnerships and so on. So it's a hot topic in the legal community in itself. Let me move on to the book, Pride Leadership Strategies for the LGBTQ plus leader. And I love this bit of the book, to be the king or queen of their jungle. Tell us about the book. How did it all kind of come about for you, Steve?
Yeah, so I've been, like I said, I'm in the space for quite some time. I have a couple other books
Hmm.
out there on various topics, but I knew, being and I go on site. Me and my top doggers, we go on site and do a lot of workshops with larger companies, and we do it on a regular basis. So you get to know their corporate culture, and you see a lot of leaders kind of go through your virtual door and your physical door, and
Yeah.
I was just kind of watching as a nerdy qualitative researcher would do. And you start to see patterns of behavior where people are rocking and rolling in leadership, and patterns of behavior where people are crashing and burning. And so I'm
Yeah.
just kind of tucking that data back in. And then I was at a conference in 2018, and I'm kind of outside a session sorting my business cards. There's a woman next to me doing kind of the same thing. And she's like, we just struck up a conversation. She's like, what do you do? I'm like, oh, consulting, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, how about you? She's like, I'm a publisher. I said, you know what? There's a book in my head that needs to come out. She's like, well, let's get that book out. And flash forward, Jen is my publisher now, Publisher Purpose Press. It's located here in the US. And it's
Right.
just a fantastic experience. So I was going to go down the path of writing a quote unquote generic leadership book, me and like 5,000 others per year that seem to write these. And as I started kind of outlining it and post-it noting my ideas, and I also do a lot of volunteer work in social justice, especially around LGBTQ plus folks, and so now I'm like
Uh-huh.
thinking leadership a little bit more, and I'm starting to watch my queer brothers and sisters, and then if you remember Sex in the City from years ago.
Yes.
So Carrie Bradshaw would always sit down at her little computer and go, I couldn't help but wonder if, and so that kind of popped into my head, and I couldn't help but wonder if somebody who's in the LGBTQ plus community has a different experience to flex their leadership awesomeness than maybe our straight brothers and sisters. And again, just to put a fine point on it, be very explicit. I'm not saying in my book nor here that
Hmm.
straight people can't be good leaders. That's not the point. But I am saying in the book that because of the nature of being a quote unquote other, meaning being part of the queer community, you might look at these opportunities to flex and develop leadership competencies that really in the grand scheme of everybody are just awesome. So for example, one of the six we talk about in Pride Leadership is being authentic, being an authentic leader. And so on one side of the coin, I mean, you look at the Brene Browns and some of the other awesome folks, they've been saying this for a while, that you're an authentic leader. What you're doing is being yourself in the workplace, and you're fostering trust. And that's the golden ticket for any good leadership stuff. So then I think about it
Mm.
through the queer lens. If I'm an out man at work, or I'm a trans woman being my authentic self within the workplace, you can't get more authentic than that. And it's just allowing us sometimes on a daily basis to come out and be our authentic selves. And that really flexes some leadership muscles that we can actually focus toward being a more effective leader.
Yeah, indeed, and it's interesting because one of the bits in the book here is, as a member of the LGBTQ plus community, did you know that you already naturally have some amazing leadership skills inside you based upon your experience that you may not be capitalizing on? What's your kind of experience of people who are in the community? Why do you think that they've got these leadership skills inside themselves? What's the kind of logic behind that?
Yeah, so in the book I talk about six competencies that really any leader can start to
You,
digest and be better leaders. Being authentic, having courage, engaging with empathy, effective communication, fostering
uh
relationships, and shaping culture. And so within each of those six leadership competencies, I talk about how, as a member of the LGBTQ plus community, you really start to kind of already play with those. And oh, and by the way, at the end of each chapter, here's ways you can do that even more. So it's
Oh,
like,
right.
say, like courage. So again, and I'm such a nerd, so I always cite like, hey, whoever said this first, awesome. I didn't invent leadership nor these topics. However, I use that as my starting point to jump and say, okay, but let's talk further about what
Mhm.
courage looks like. And
Yeah.
so courage is being that leader and having to have those hard conversations with an employee or a peer or even a boss. Courage
Mm.
is saying, being in that meeting, that board meeting, whatever, and saying, you know what, we shouldn't do this, and here's why I think we should go in this direction. And those are small, minor things, but they take a lot of effort for some leaders to really kind of show and explore and share within the rest of the team, within the rest of the organizational culture. And so, the idea, the book is meant to be very prescriptive. Hey, I'm an educator at the baseline. So it's very like, okay, at the end of this chapter, you can do this. It actually then led me to create, an 8-week online training program. And there's a workbook that goes with the book and all sorts of like other things to kind of help dive deeper into these 6 concepts. Because really, if you can do these where they're in your, what we call unconscious competence, meaning they're automatic as a leader, you just do them, you're so much more effective than if you have to like really think about, oh gosh, how do I be empathetic today with my team? That's a little bit harder to do.
Yeah. Do you think being part of the LGBTQ plus community yourself, has that had a big kind of impact on your career in itself? Do you think that's been quite career defining?
Well, besides being the gay leadership dude, we'll put that aside for a second. Um, Trademark on that, just so you know, in the States
Yeah,
here.
I saw that. I saw that.
But in all sincerity, it absolutely has. I mean, I came
Mm,
out at 24, basically right after undergrad, and when I was entering in the professional workforce, and I figured my authentic self out. And prior to that, I'm a white cisgendered gay dude. So you take the gay part out of it, I'm part of some privileged pieces there. I'm white, and I'm a dude. And so
yeah.
once I became and understood that I really am a quote unquote other, I am part of a minority community, it really shifted the focus on things. And it really, empathy is one of my top 6 for a reason. I think
Yeah.
for me personally, being an empathetic leader has always been part of my experience. And it wasn't really until I went down the path of writing Pride Leadership that I'm like, oh, that really has shaped the way I look at my clients and my peers and my team members and all the folks around me. And it's made me personally a better and more effective leader and consultant in the process.
It's really interesting, and kind of, I guess courage is a big part of when people are gay. I think we're still in a community now where I think coming out is getting easier. I know it is in this country. I think there's more representation in the media. There is more talk about gay people, but I personally still think we've even got a long way to go in this country. I think if you're lucky enough to live in the centre of the very centre of the West End in London, yes, it's probably a very different experience.
Exactly.
But what's your kind of thoughts on the US and where you're kind of up to at the moment in terms of diversity and inclusion overall?
Yeah, and it varies from region to region, city to
Mm.
city. And it also varies upon your perceived level of gayness, for lack of a better term. I mean, there's that the
Mm.
historical piece, at least in the States, where gay women are perceived a little bit easier than gay men, and you have all these
Mm.
annoying stereotypes and things of that nature. And but I think it really boils down to um, it's getting better as the phrasing has been going, but there's still so much huge opportunity for education for people to help allow folks to just kind of be their authentic selves, to embrace that authenticity. And especially from a business perspective, if we say, you know what, maybe we do need more queer people here in the workplace, because not only will they bring a different perspective to our work, but also when we look outside, they're going to better reflect what we're seeing in our customer base and the general population, if you will. So it's
Mm.
getting better, but there's still a whole lot of opportunity to move. I know, personally speaking, when I launched, so the Gay Leadership Dude brand, if you will, kind of, it's my personal brand. So Top Dog is my business. The Gay Leadership Dude is just me. So I couldn't sell the Gay Leadership Dude, but I could sell Top Dog, to kind of put it easy. And
What a trademark to have, though, the gay leadership dude. To know you've got that in the bag. You're the only gay
the
leadership
only
dude
one.
in the world.
Exactly.
What a claim to have. It sounds like to me that, and I think from what you're saying there, even in the States, it's very much a postcode or a zip code lottery, depending on your the level of kind of representation, that you've got in your local community. And I can imagine it's, in parts of the States, it's really difficult.
Yeah.
With the book, how's that kind of been received since it's been published and it's been out there?
Oh, it's been extremely, for the most part, it's been extremely well received. You're getting to the point you're making about like acceptance. I know, I've been fortunate that in my whole career, I'm surrounded by love and awesome companies I work with, awesome people I work with. So, being
Mm.
the gay leadership dude, yes, it takes courage. I'm like, no big deal. And when I started doing more mass marketing, especially on social media, is when the haters really started coming out. I'm like, oh wow, I live in this love bubble. This is so interesting to be getting
Ah,
Bible quotes sent to my Facebook page and stuff like that.
oh
Um,
wow.
yeah, and that actually was a good experience to have, quite frankly, because it just makes me more resound that we have an opportunity. Yes, this book is about queer leadership, if you will, but really at its foundation, it's about being more consciously inclusive, regardless of the demographic. And I think that's where I kept seeing, and I continue to see the opportunity, especially working with larger clients, where it's like, you don't have to talk about the gay thing. Let's just talk about accepting all the others that are within your workplace and beyond, and being more. And I use the phrase consciously inclusive versus unconscious bias, very, very proposively. I was doing a workshop years ago when I was at Disney, and it was on unconscious bias. And there's this gentleman in the back, arms folded, very voluntold to be there. And during a break, I went up to him. I'm like,
Mm.
is there something you want to share with me? He's like, well, if it's unconscious bias, I can't do anything about it, can I? And I'm like, oh, interesting. And so I've always flipped the phrasing now to be more consciously inclusive, because you can do something about it, and it just kind of makes people feel a little bit more in that active space, if you will. And I think we have
Mm.
that opportunity for all of us as good leaders to help be more consciously inclusive, whether it be for LGBTQ plus folks or any of the others that are out there.
Well, what advice would you give to someone who maybe isn't out at the moment in their work? Because I was very lucky that when I was young, 18, one of my first jobs was with Virgin Atlantic, and I don't think there could be a more inclusive
Right.
gay company in the whole world. I
Right.
remember on my first day, I was sitting on the check-in desk, quite nervous. I was quite, I wouldn't say I was out then. And this lady comes up to me and she goes, "So, are you gay? Are you straight then?" And I was like, "What?" I said,
Wow.
"I'm gay." And she said, "Oh, you'll fit in just fine here then, love. They all are." And that was my first day at
Welcome.
my job. Yeah. What advice would you give to someone who maybe isn't out of work? Because I think coming out at work in itself is almost like you're coming out again sometimes.
Yeah.
What advice would you maybe give to someone, or someone that is gay that thinks to myself, I'm struggling with that, or I'm not quite where I want to be, or maybe they're not having a great time at the moment.
Yeah, and it's funny. I actually address this in the book, and I actually started a
Mm.
column I've been doing with Advocate magazine, and actually it's the basis of my next book, which is called Your Queer Career, and
Yeah.
this is exactly a question I've gotten several times, and I think
Mm.
obviously it's the individual who has to figure it out. Of course, I believe the Human Rights Campaign latest statistic. It's and here in the U.S. it's about 50-ish% of people aren't out in the workplace, which still astounds me. Now, I'll be interested to see when the latest rounds of studies happen with regard to the ruling earlier this year about the Supreme Court and how you can't fire people for being queer, and so we'll see if that impacts that number. But regardless, say
Still
50,
crazy that that's even a thing. But
exactly.
that there's people still being fired for that.
Oh, absolutely. And so, but if you think 50% ish of the population are still closeted in the workplace in the US, which is just still astounds me. And so I acknowledge that. And so there's a variety of reasons why, but I think it starts with asking the reason to yourself, why are you not your true authentic self out in the workplace? Because getting back to pride leadership and the concept of authenticity, if I'm truly not being my 100% authentic self within the workplace, I'm coming in on a Monday morning and people are like, assuming we could go into work, and people are like, what did you do this weekend? And you're hiding, what you did, or changing pronouns real fast in your head, or not putting up those artifacts on your desk that show you your significant other or family or whatever. That takes effort, that
Mm,
takes energy. And so while I'm throwing energy at kind of hiding my authenticity, it's depleting my energy that I could focus on my work and fostering my team,
yeah.
doing better.
Mm,
And so I would ask somebody to really stop and think, why? What's preventing you from sharing your authentic self within your workplace. And also that kind of aligns with organizational as well as personal values. We talk about that in the book. And
Mm.
sometimes people say, well, I just couldn't be my authentic self in my workplace. Why? Are you sure? Is it your own fear? So get back to that courage thing. Do you think people won't have empathy for your difference? It's really starting to analyze. And in Pride Leadership, I talk about getting in your drone, kind of that drone perspective. You kind of zoom up in a little drone. You're looking above
Mm.
yourself. You really have to start to do some self analysis to really understand the why. And some people say, well, I need this job. Do you? I mean, yes, of
Yeah.
course you need the job, but does it have to be this job? What's your fear? And what's holding you back from being who you truly are within your workplace?
You make a really valid point, and I think one thing that I had when I was starting out in the recruitment industry, and I remember it quite vividly, was I didn't know when the right time to mention it was, and it was even the fact that in my mind it was something that I had to mention because I wanted to check what the company was like, what the people were like, what were they accepting people. I couldn't even think when the right time to even bring it up was, even if that shouldn't even be a thing though. Should it, Steve? You're having to think, when do I bring it up to sort of check the culture? Is there kind of a right time in your mind when you think someone should be bringing that up and being their true self? Should that be during an interview process to kind of check, is the company the right kind of business that you want to be a part of, or do you have to get that surprise on day one? Not that that should even be a thing, but I think it is a thing.
I would love to say, Jason, that it's how would we phrase the exact same experience for a straight person? And
Mm.
that's kind of the thing I would say, like, if it's organic and natural, then say it. I know I make it a very concerted effort in every workshop that I do to share that I have a husband of 23 years. I don't like throw it out there like, hello, I'm gay, like kind of like like big old
Jazz
rainbow.
hands, pink
Yeah,
suits as you walk on. Yeah.
exactly. Rainbows shining out of everywhere. Yeah, I don't do that, but like
All right.
one of the multi-day workshops we do for a client when we could go on site, there's the intros at the beginning, and it's something simple like, who are you, where you're from, what do you like? And so I go through my spiel. It's like I'll go first to model the way, and when I get to the what I like, I say, well, I like my two canine kids because they're awesome, and I like to do athletics and work out. And I should say, oh, and I really should say I like my husband of 23 years because if I didn't, that's kind of bad. So there's that. And I'm like, okay, who's next? And I just kind of leave it there. It's just part of the conversation, just like anyone else. And it's interesting and fascinating to watch how people react to that. And I also know that with this particular client, one of their major, and they're a global pharma company, they're massive. One of their big values is to embrace inclusion and really celebrate differences. And so when people react to that, then I have some coaching points for them as a leader to be like, you're supposed to be, as your social contract within this workplace, to embrace differences. So tell me more
Mm.
about that. And it's worked really, really well to kind of use that as a way to help them look at their own performance and see where it goes.
Really interesting. And would you give any? Obviously, it's a difficult time at the moment with COVID. I do think there's a lot of opportunity still, and it sounds like that really doing well off the back of the pandemic, and a lot of people are. But there is a lot of people equally who are struggling. What advice would you maybe give to someone who's thinking about starting a business? I've got an idea. I don't know how to get it to market. What would kind of be your key advice, having been so to speak, round the block a number of times, Steve, when it comes to businesses
Number
and
of times.
so on?
I think the first thing I would ask somebody to think about is, what corporate culture do you want? And I know that might sound silly, especially if you're like a solopreneur and it's just you, but it's never too early to think about the legacy of the business that you're creating. And whether it
Mm.
be listing out your organizational values, writing that vision mission statement, thinking about, okay, I need to find vendors to start supplying. Am I looking at diverse vendors, or maybe areas I wouldn't look at? What about the people around me when I'm starting to hire? Am I hiring the exact same person just like me, or am I looking at different demographics? So I think it's never
Mm.
too early to think about, how are you including others in your journey, in your story, and also how are you giving back to make the world a little bit better? And I know that sounds really altruistic and hard, and I can say this to be very blunt. I lost everything when COVID hit in March. Our
Mm.
massive way that we generate revenue and cash flow at TopDog Learning Group is on-site training. Well, guess what happened? We lost a
Yeah.
whole ton of money come April 1st because our three biggest clients said, we are not bringing you or your team on site, Steve. Things are too weird. And I'm like, oh, rats, I got like 2 months of runway and cash flow left. And so I don't say these
Wow.
things. Yeah. And we turned it around, and thank goodness, we were able to kind of do what we did. But even then, I was still trying to think about, it's not just going to get the bucks, it's going to get the bucks and also do the world slightly good. I think that's kind of the way I would approach it if I was to, have to hang out my shingle again, which ultimately I actually did have to do, even though TopDog's been 12 years old and running.
When I think this is a really interesting point, and I think this will resonate with a lot of people. But when the pandemic did hit, was it kind of an instant for you, or the world's ending, or did you kind of straight away look through it, the world with a positive lens? Because you strike me as such an optimistic, positive person, Steve. What was your kind of reaction and thought process when you found yourself in that situation?
I'm a glass half full kind of guy, which you're right, Jason. And
Uh-huh.
so I kind of was waiting to see what would happen. I was constantly getting in touch with our biggest clients and even our smaller clients and saying, how can we help you? How can we help you? And started doing some like pro bono webinars. One of the webinars I used to do years ago was it's a webinar on how to do webinars, which was kind of ironic given now the Zoom world. So I kind of updated it and started doing it for free just to kind of help some folks out. And started working with some nonprofits to be like, hey, you need online programming. I already have it 25 years worth on a hard drive. Let me do stuff for you. One, that kept me busy. Two, that helped people listening. And then three, that quite frankly was getting my name out there and TopDog's name and saying, oh, remember, we're still here. And so I kind of did that. And then once April hit and our three biggest clients said, and just kind of from a sales perspective, we're done selling our year by February for all the face-to-face stuff, all the on-site training we do. So I was done
Yeah.
selling for the year. So I was set. We were done. And anything sold after February was just gravy on top, score. And so once the last of the clients said, no, we're not going to do any on-site this year, I was like, oh my gosh. And so it was just, it took me way back to 2008 when I started TopDog, which was also a really bad time to start a business if you remember the global economy.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, and side note, again, in change management, we teach the concepts of being resilient in times of change. So physician, heal thyself. I really reflected on some of those skills that we had and we taught clients and put it back on myself and my team and said, okay, wait, what can we do? Let's kind of look at the glass being half full. Where's the opportunity? What can we do? Who can we call? I already had a learning management system out there, so at my LMS. So it's like, well, what content do we have that we can start churning out to help people as well as to leverage this asset that we've been paying on? And so it was those types of strategies that we started to think through, not just to get a buck, but also what's needed right now in the marketplace and how can we fill that need, solve that problem, and kind of see where the revenue goes from there.
And I think that's a really good way of looking at things, and that's how I've always ran a business. It's about adding value. It's not about looking at the pound or the dollar signs. It's about trying to find those ways to add value. And I think that's why you've kind of rode through this time. And I actually spoke to someone a few episodes ago who also runs a consultancy who was faced with very similar challenges. And I think it's that ability to look at things through that kind of glass half forward, kind of pick yourself up when these challenges come. And I commend you. It sounds like you've really adapted well. And I think that's a really nice way to end the show, Steve, on that adding value. And I think that's a great listen for people out there as well. If people want to find out more about you, Top Dog, or the book, where can they go to?
Yeah, the best way to do is just our main website, topdoglearning.biz, B-I-Z. Or if you're so inclined to look at the Pride Leadership book, if you actually just go to type in Steve on Amazon.com, believe it or not, that URL was available. It'll redirect you to your local Amazon page and you can get it as appropriate.
You've got many trademarks, Steve. Many
I do.
names in the bag. You've been the first of many things. But listen, it's been an absolute delight to talk to you. I know lots of people are really going to find this episode interesting, and many of our brothers and sisters in the LGBTQ plus community will also find this really insightful. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me on this episode today. I'm Jason Connolly. This is the Career Success Podcast. That was Dr. Steve Yacovelli. And until next